to Out of the Box Radio with me, your host, Christine Blasdale. Out of the Box Radio is a weekly podcast of audible ear candy dedicated to bringing a fresh perspective on this thing that we call life. And each and every week, we're going to be diving into the topics that matter most with lively conversations on issues such as health, wellness, and transformational healing, all with the goal of creating a better world and becoming a happier human being. I will be your tour guide for this epic adventure, and each and every week, we're going to be embarking on a journey with the ultimate goal being transformation to our highest potential. And now, let's get out of the box. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Out of the Box Radio. I am Christine Blasdale, and I am so very happy that you're joining me today. My very special guest today is David ICKE. David is a writer, public speaker, and former media personality, best known for his views on what he calls who and what is really controlling the world. Describing himself as the most controversial speaker and author in the world, he has attracted a very substantial following across the political spectrum. One of the very first books I read of David's was called The Biggest Secret back in 1999 and has been called the conspiracy theorist Rosetta Stone. I will attest to that. Since then, he has written many, many books, including his latest, The Phantom Self and How to Find the Real One. He is also currently embarking on a worldwide wake-up tour with upcoming speaking engagements in both North America and Europe. And on this very special, just a few days close to the 15th anniversary of September 11th, I'd like to welcome to the program David ICKE. David, welcome to Out of the Box Radio.
Thank you, Christine.
Now let's get, with all of the guests that I have on Out of the Box Radio, I always like to find out how they started this journey that they're currently on. And I would love for the listeners and myself to know, when did you know, David, that what you were being told and shown just wasn't the truth, that there was something much deeper going on in the world around us?
Well, that's a long and a very strange story. Strange on the face of it. Anyway, ever since I was a little kid, I've questioned authority. Authority to me is something that has to earn my respect, not demand it purely because it's authority. So I've had that mode of seeing the world all along. But where things really changed were absolutely dramatically was at the end of the 80s, in 1990. I'd been a professional soccer player. I had to finish with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 21. And then I became a newspaper journalist, a radio journalist, and then a BBC news and sports presenter through the 1980s, and also became a national spokesman for 2 years or so with the British Green Party in the 1980s. But the change really came in 1989, because I had this feeling throughout that year that when I was in a room alone, I wasn't alone. And through 1989, this became more and more powerful and more tangible, and culminated when I was working for the BBC, and I was in a hotel in Shepherd's Bush in London, not far from the BBC, working for the BBC. And I was in a hotel room alone, and this presence was so powerful and so blatant that I actually talked into the apparently empty room, and said, "Look, if there's someone there, would you please contact me, because you're driving me up the wall." Mm-hmm. And then about a week later, I guess it must have been, I was with my son, who was a little boy then. What happened was, we were going to have some lunch in a cafe on the railway station near where I live. So I'm walking to the cafe with Gareth, and I got stopped by this railway worker who wanted to talk about football, because I used to talk about football on the BBC. So I was having this chat, and eventually it ended, and I realized Gareth wasn't there, but I knew where he would be. He'd be in the little bookshop news shop next to where I was, and he'd be looking at the books in various subjects that he liked. So I went into the shop, and I saw him there with a book in his hand, and I said, "Come on, Gareth, we'll go and get some lunch." And as I turned to leave, to go back through the door, my feet wouldn't move. And I felt the soles of my feet burning. And I heard not a voice, but a very strong thought form go through my mind, which said, "Go and look at the books on the far side." So I've never experienced anything like that before. Any of this, what my people call the paranormal, though it's actually normal if you go beyond the postage stamp view of normal that we have. Anyway, I'm standing there. I started to walk towards these books. Now, I knew what these books were in this new shop. They were romantic novels of perfectly formed English roses, falling in love with perfectly formed soldiers and all that stuff. And I thought, why am I walking over here? But when I got there, in among all the romantic novels was a book with a woman's face on it. It was called Mind to Mind by a lady called Betty Shine. And I picked it up because it was different, and I turned it over and I read the blurb, and I saw that Betty Shine was a psychic and hands-on healer, and it was a book about her life. So in my immediate response was, I wonder if this person could pick up what I'm feeling around me the last year. So I read the book quickly and contacted her, and I went to see her. And I went to see her 4 times. And I went to see her, not by telling her what was happening to me. I wanted to keep that completely from her. But that I had arthritis, which was true, and maybe her hands-on healing would help. So I go along the first 2 times, and we had a nice chat, and she did the hands-on healing, and not a lot happened really. And then I went the 3rd time, and I'm sitting on a medical-type bench while she's working just close to my left knee. And suddenly I felt like a spider's web, a cobweb on my face. And what struck me was I'd read in her book that when other levels of reality are trying to lock into you, you can sometimes feel like a spider's web on your face. Now, I didn't understand at the time, but of course I do now. What I was feeling was an electromagnetic field, which is the same phenomenon as when the hairs stand up on the back of your neck in an excited crowd when a big electromagnetic field is being generated by the excitement. Anyway, I said nothing to Betty, but about 15 seconds later, she threw her head back and said, "My God, this is powerful. I've got to close my eyes for this one." And proceeded to tell me, and my backside was slipping down this bench because I'd never experienced anything like this before. I didn't know what was going on. That she saw a figure in her mind who wanted to communicate with me. And the opening line was interesting because she said, "I'm being told that you wanted them to contact you, but the time wasn't right." Never told her about what had happened in the hotel room a little while before. Anyway, what came out in this situation was that I was going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets, that humanity had to know what was going on in the world. And there was many other things that came up at that time. And then I went back about a week later and the same happened. And then that was it. I didn't go back again. And on the second time, I think it was the second time, there was a line that came out through Betty Shine which said, "One man cannot change the world, but one man can communicate the message that would change the world." That I would face enormous opposition, but, quote, "they would be there to protect me." So what then happened? I'm working for the BBC and I'm still a national spokesman for the Green Party. And in fact, I walked out of a front room where it all happened and got on a train to go and present the television program for the BBC in a complete daze, wondering what's happening to me. And then things started to move very quickly. Synchronicity started happening in my life. I kept meeting people and coming across things which kind of related to in the early stages of what is really going on in the world. So I started this synchronistic journey. I ceased to be a spokesman for the Green Party, and I was now on my own, just following what was ever happening to me. And I wrote a book called Truth Vibrations because just describing what was happening to me. And I called it Truth Vibrations because one of the messages that came through was that there was a vibrational information change, as I would call it now, a frequency change coming. that was going to wake people up from their coma. The people that were most awake would be affected first, and then even those that were really, really, in a coma state in terms of awareness of reality would start to be touched by it. Anyway, when the book went off to be printed, I suddenly got this tremendous urge out of nowhere to go to Peru. And I would be walking down the street and I'd see advertisements for Peru. I'd turn the television on and there would be a documentary about Peru. Peru, I never thought about Peru before. Purely on intuition, I get on a plane to Peru, and I had no idea where I was going or why I was going there, but purely on intuition. And anyway, for 3 weeks, it was just an extraordinary a journey of synchronicity, which led me to a hill near a place called Siustania, an ancient Inca site. And I walked up this hill purely on intuition again. And I stood, there was a kind of a circle of stones there, and I walked into the middle of them. And suddenly, it was like in that news shot, only many, many, many times more powerful. My feet started to burn. And then I felt like a drill feeling going in the top of my head. And there was obviously a flow of energy coming down through the top of my head and through my feet, and then a flow coming the other way. And then my arms went out at 45 degrees without me making any decision to do that. And then I heard this, again, very strong thought form going through my mind, which said, "It will be over when you feel the rain," which was ridiculous because I was standing under literally a cloudless Peruvian sky and a piercing Peruvian sun. So anyway, this energy going through me got more and more powerful to the point where my body was shaking, literally shaking. And my arms, although they were agony afterwards, I didn't feel them, even though they were still there at 45 degrees for 45 minutes, or the best part of an hour. I kept going in and out of conscious awareness, a bit like driving a car, and then you can't remember where the last 2 miles have gone and what happened. And one of these times where I came back to conscious awareness, I saw that over the distant mountains, there was a light gray mist. And this mist got darker and darker as I looked at it. And then this rainstorm, this enormous stair rod rainstorm, came out of these mountains towards me. And I remember, I can see it now, standing there with my arms in the air, with this wall of water coming towards me. And then it hit me, and I was soaked in an instant. And as the water hit me, the energy stopped. And I staggered forward. I felt like Bambi, could hardly stand. My shoulders were now agony. And I had energy pouring out of my hands and my feet for hours and hours and hours. In fact, in terms of my feet, it was like 24 hours the next morning. And I came back home to England. Suddenly, I didn't know what planet I was on. I didn't know where I was. For 3 months, I just didn't know what was happening to me. And it was like, what was happening was concepts, insights, information, thoughts were pouring into my conscious mind. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't process them. I didn't know what to make of them, and I couldn't process them. There was so much. And it was like pressing too many keys on a computer, and the computer froze. And for 3 months, I didn't know where I was. Then after about 3 months, everything morphed back into clarity. And so what then happened was I went on this journey, still going on today, where it's like some force is handing me puzzle pieces almost in the order to most easily assimilate them and understand where they go. And it started out showing me in the early years how the forces that appear to be in power in the world and making the decisions are not really the ones who are making the decisions. And then as the years have unfolded, these 26 years, it's gone deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, deep into the illusory nature of reality, into the ultimately non-human nature of that which is manipulating human society. And it goes on to this day. So that's how it came about.
Because we're so close to the anniversary, the 15-year anniversary of 9/11, for me, that event, I mean, prior to that, I was an entertainment writer. I was doing kind of like Hollywood gossipy kind of writing for AOL and MSN. And once September 11th happened, there was something that shifted within me where I realized that no, but I didn't care anymore what Britney Spears was wearing. You know what I'm saying? I didn't care anymore, and I knew on that day, obviously, that the world had changed. But I also, David, I got to tell you, I saw that and I said something is really terribly wrong with this story, and it was the beginning of my wake up journey. You know, throughout this whole process. Since then, I have discovered a lot. I mean, there's so much, and you talk about the rabbit hole that maybe there's some people that still think that there were 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters, or a guy named Osama bin Laden, you know, was on kidney dialysis and orchestrated this whole thing. But you and I know that it's different, and probably you know some things that I obviously don't know regarding this. But your initial thoughts on the 15th anniversary of 9/11, what has happened since then? For our listeners who don't know, it wasn't 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters, was it?
It certainly wasn't. Full enough, I'm talking to you now from New York, and I'm talking in New York all day on Saturday, and then I'm going to go to Ground Zero on Sunday for the 15th anniversary. And let's just start with a very sobering thought that almost everyone misses. I've just come back from a speaking tour of Australia and New Zealand, and I got on the mainstream media quite a bit for the first time there. And I made this point that I'm going to make to these skeptical people interviewing me. And I saw their face change, and I saw the light go on, at least to an extent. And all I said was this: do you accept that we were lied to monumentally over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify a catastrophic invasion, a catastrophe that's still unfolding in the Middle East? And they would say, well, okay, all right, I'll give you that. And then I would say, well, the very same people, not the same agencies, not the same institutions, the same people that told you the official story of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq told you the official story of 9/11. And yet you accept you were monumentally lied to over Iraq, but that you're astonished that I should question the official story of 9/11. And they have absolutely nowhere to go, because quite clearly it's journalistic schizophrenia, cognitive dissonance on an extraordinary scale. And these talks I'm doing in America over 10 hours are all about context. You can look at any situation in and of itself, and it looks a certain way. But when you put that in context, in terms of how it fits and connects to other situations, then suddenly the pixels become pictures, the dots become pictures. So here's just to pull a few things together that takes us from 9/11 pretty quickly to present day. In September 2000, there was an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century. They were known in the mainstream media as the neocons. They were people like Robert Kagan, like William Kristol, like Dick Cheney, like Donald Rumsfeld, like Paul Wolfowitz, like Doug Zackheim, who would become the comptroller in charge of the whole financial side of the Pentagon. People like Richard Pearl. And they produced a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses: Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century. And in this document, published in September 2000, they called for American forces to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars. And they named the countries where they wanted that to happen and where they wanted regimes to change. They included Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, North Korea, and they even talked about regime change in China. A few weeks, certainly a few months after that document was published in September 2001, these very same people came to power in the Pentagon and in the Bush government in January 2001. And there was something else that was said in that document. It said that this process of transformation, as they called it, would be very, very slow without a certain scenario. And I'll give you the exact quote. Further, the process of transformation, these regime changes, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 9 months after those people came to power with Bush, 12 months to the month after that document was published, the United States had what George Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And then in 2007, General Wesley Clark, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, was interviewed on the program Democracy Now! And he told a story of what happened to him days after 9/11. He said he went to the Pentagon days after 9/11 and met Wolfowitz, met Rumsfeld, etc., and then went down to meet a general he knew from the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. They had a chat, and this general said to him, "We're going to invade Iraq." This is days after 9/11. I keep repeating, it's very important. And Clark said, I said to him, "What are we going to invade Iraq for? Are they connected to Al-Qaeda?" And the general said, "Well, we've got no evidence of that, basically. But maybe they need to react, and we've got a big military, and so they've decided to invade somebody." They basically, not those words, but that thought. So anyway, Clark goes away, and he says, "I came back a few weeks later, by which time the United States is in Afghanistan, justified by 9/11. And he said, I met the same general. He said, and I said to him, "Why aren't we invading Iraq? I thought we were going to invade Iraq." He said, the general picked up a piece of paper and said, "It's worse than that, sir. We just had this from upstairs," i.e. Rumsfeld's office. "We're going to invade 7 countries in 5 years."
Wow.
And these countries included Iraq, Libya, Syria, the very countries, A, that were in that document published in September 2000, and B, the countries that have been invaded in various ways through various means ever since. And Clark said on this program about the project for the New American Century, which basically controlled the Bush administration, they wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. And then they had their trigger, they had their excuse to start picking off this list of countries, of course, because they went into Iraq and Libya and Syria. Now, the background to this war on terror that was triggered by 9/11, the never-ending war, when you know a war on terror has ended, you can never say that, unlike a conventional war. Interestingly, in 1962, there was a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff called Lyman L. Lemnitzer. In recent times, towards the end of the 1990s, an official document came to light called Operation Northwoods. And this was an operation during the Kennedy period, which he apparently put a stop to, which was planned to create terrorist events, including hijacking aircraft and having them blown from the sky, to blame it on Castro's Cuba and justify an invasion of Cuba. And it was codenamed Operation Northwoods. And the plan had the written approval of the chairman, Lemnitzer, and every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And what it called for was for, this is in official documents, I'm not surmising this, for innocent people to be shot on American streets, for boats carrying refugees fleeing Cuba to be sunk on the high seas, for a wave of violent terrorism to be launched in Washington, D.C., Miami, and elsewhere, It said people would be framed for bombings they did not commit, planes would be hijacked, using phony evidence, all of which would be blamed on Castro, thus giving Lemnitzer and his cabal, if you like, the excuse and public and international backing to launch their war on Cuba. Now, what I've been saying all these years is that the 9/11 planes were not flown by the hijackers that were blamed for it, but were actually flown from the ground. They were drones. They were remotely controlled. The suggestion that they weren't flown by the hijackers that were named is a gimmick. I mean, they were considered bad pilots on one-engine Cessnas, and at places like Venice Airport in Florida, where some of them were supposed to be trained. And one instructor said of one of them, I was surprised he could drive a car. And I spoke to an airline pilot of 28 years experience with Lufthansa, the German airline, flying wide-bodied jets. And he said to me, I couldn't have done with those planes what those planes did on 9/11. And I've been strongly suggesting that they were flown from the ground. Now, here is a quote or a description of what is in this Operation Northwoods document, which was for actions in 1962. Here is one of the scenarios that's in the document. An aircraft at Elgin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate of a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. Let's remind ourselves how few people there were, official passengers on those 9/11 planes, compared with what would normally been on those routes on another day. This document goes on. From the rendezvous point, the passenger-carrying aircraft will descend to minimum altitude and go directly into an auxiliary field at Elgin Air Force Base, where arrangements have been made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to its original status. The drone aircraft, painted in the colors of the airline they chose, would meanwhile continue to fly the filed flight plan. When over Cuba, the drone will be transmitting on the international distress frequency a Mayday message stating that he is under attack by Cuban MiG aircraft. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. This will allow the International Civil Aviation Organization radio stations in the Western Hemisphere to tell the US what has happened to the aircraft instead of the US trying to sell the incident.
Wow.
And this is what was possible technologically in 1962. What could they do now? And it's the nonsense of the official story to cover this up that has led to an organization of airline pilots specifically set up to challenge the official story of 9/11, because they say from a pilot's point of view, it's nonsense. Why a similar, very large group of architects and engineers have set up an organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, because they're pointing out that the official story of how the buildings fell from airline fuel fires is also a nonsense. Then you have to ask this question, which is kind of very relevant. How come that Mohammed Attar's girlfriend was a white non-Muslim who lived with him at Venice in Florida, who said in an interview you can see on the internet that he was a cocaine addict, he was often drunk, and his favorite food was pork chops. And we are supposed to believe that Mohammed Attar was the lead hijacker and because he was an extreme Muslim fanatic. Now, what the girlfriend said, which makes perfect sense from other research that I've done, is that when they ran out of cocaine, they would walk across to the Venice airport, where these hijackers, some of them, were supposed to have been trained. And he would walk over, and he would come back with an armful of cocaine. Where that makes sense is that to those that have researched this, that Venice airport was a notorious, certainly was, a notorious place where drugs were brought in from South America in the drug operation by the CIA. And you then ask the question, why would the CIA be running a drugs operation? To make the money to spend on operations like this and others, to stop there being any paper trail through the official financing of it. So they're called black operations. And so there was a story in an Indian newspaper, which was covered in other newspapers, that the head of military intelligence in Pakistan wired to Mohammed Attar, or had wired to Mohammed Attar, something like $100,000. This was said to be, or was linked to, helping to finance the 9/11 operation. Well, there's two things to that. Why has the American authorities, why have they never mentioned this in terms of this head of Pakistan intelligence wiring this money? Why was this same head of Pakistan intelligence in Washington, D.C. on 9/11? Because it was nothing to do with 9/11, that money. Mohammed Attar was running drugs in this CIA operation, which was fundamentally connected to Pakistan and the poppy fields of Afghanistan. And it was part of this operation. And Attar was used as a stooge to be blamed for it when he had no idea what was going on. And then we go to Aaron Russo, an award-winning film producer who was producer of Trading Places with Eddie Murphy. Before he died, when he learned he had cancer, he made public a meeting he had with a man called Nick Rockefeller, who now I think lives in China. And this is a year before 9/11. And this is what Aaron Russo said Nick Rockefeller told him. He was trying to recruit him into one of the organizations in this manipulative network. Russo said that Rockefeller told him there would be an event that would lead to the invasion of Afghanistan. Remember, this was a year before 9/11. To an invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, to take over the oil fields and establish a base in the Middle East. Russo would see soldiers looking in caves in Afghanistan and Pakistan for Osama bin Laden. There would be an endless war on terror where there's no real enemy. The whole thing would be a giant hoax. He said people have to be ruled and the population reduced by at least half. And he talked also about a plan for what he called microchipping the serfs. So when you then look at what's followed, well, they have picked off country after country. Afghanistan, then they've gone to Iraq, then they've gone to Libya, then they've gone to Syria. They want to get Syria out of the way in terms of taking control of that country totally, and then they want to move on to Iran. And what they're doing is picking off countries on that list. That from September 2000, the neocons. But here's another cruncher about the way this world is controlled and the way American politics works, but politics everywhere works. The reason that they lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, Bush and Tony Blair, the infamous Tony Blair in Britain, and both administrations, was because Iraq was on the wish list of regime change. And they had no excuse or reason to do it. So they had to invent one. That's where weapons of mass destruction came from. And then eventually they move on to another on the list, Libya. And what they did was train and arm so-called rebels, which are now in Syria, to attack the Libyan regime of Gaddafi, and they said nothing at that time. When the Gaddafi regime responded to those attacks, then they couldn't find microphones quick enough to say Gaddafi's killing his own people,
Right.
and they sent the military in, they sent the boys in to devastate that country, and it's a basket case now, suffering horrifically. Now, here's the point: by this time, it's not Bush and Blair going into Libya; it's Obama, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, and the British Prime Minister, David Cameron. Now, hold on a minute. Just think about this a second. Hold on. Obama's a Democrat, right? Clinton's a Democrat. In Britain, Cameron's a conservative. They took over from a Republican president, Bush, and a Labour Party Prime Minister, Blair. But the same wish list from September 2000 goes on being ticked off, and they saying people went into Syria, and it's all a scam. Let me finally get on this point. Just read you a quote from the former French Minister for Foreign Affairs, a man called Roland Dumas, and this is what he said on French TV. And he's not even talking about America here, because Britain is massively involved in this. He said on French TV, "I'm going to tell you something. I was in England 2 years before the violence in Syria on other business. I met with top British officials who confessed to me that they were preparing something in Syria. This was not in Britain, not in America. Britain was organizing an invasion of rebels into Syria. This is 2009-ish, and it happened in 2011 when it all kicked off. They even asked me," he said, "although I was no longer Minister for Foreign Affairs, if I would like to participate." So what we're looking at here is a classic example of what I dubbed a long time ago, problem, reaction, solution. You create the problem, you give the public the official version of that problem that you want them to believe, so you get the reaction of do something, a reaction of fear, so that at stage 3, having created the problem and got the reaction, you then offer in action, military action and changes in legislation, the solutions to the problems you have covertly created but blame someone else for doing so. And there's another version of that, which I call no problem reaction solution, where you don't even need a real problem, you just need the perception of one. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq is a classic.
Let's talk about, David, the real people who we don't know their names, maybe, or maybe we do know maybe you know their names, but who are the real people, entities, whatever they are, that are running the show?
Well, the way it works, if people could visualize a spider's web, and in the center of the web is a spider, and that is where it's coming from, ultimately. And that spider is deeply, deeply in the hidden. The strands of the web immediately around the spider are the most exclusive secret societies. Many of them don't even have names. And at that level of the web, they will be completely, virtually in the know of what's happening and why. And they're serving the spider, which is dictating events. As you come out from the center, the spider, you then hit that level of the web where you're meeting the secret societies that we've heard of. The Freemasons, the inner core of the Freemasons, that is. The Knights of Malta, the Knights Templar, Opus Dei, the inner sanctum of the Jesuit order. And then eventually you hit a series of organizations, which I call cusp organizations. They sit at that point in the web where the hidden meets the seen. These are the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States, which is driven with others so much American foreign policy, and still does. The Trilateral Commission, created by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's former national security advisor, who to this day is massively involved in this. You read Brzezinski's books. He's telling you what's coming. He's not telling you it's coming because he's telling you it's coming. He's saying what should happen, and he's telling you what's coming. Extraordinary when you see it. And so anyway, at this point, these CUSP organizations, they take the directions from they're hidden, and they play them out through the scene. So now we go through the CUSP organizations, which are groupings of politicians, of business people, of bankers, of journalists, of all these people of influence. And you then go into things that we see. They go into the banking system that we see, the corporate system that we see, government agencies, the Pentagon,
the media,
all these agents, the media, big time, that we see. I mean, the media is owned by so few pure corporations now, the mainstream media, and it's in your face. And what these organizations are fiercely compartmentalized, like a secret society. It's broken up into levels, it's broken up into degrees. And each degree only knows about its degree and the degrees below, which it's come through to reach where it is. It doesn't know what's happening in the degrees above it because it's so compartmentalized in terms of knowledge. And so when you see these compartmentalized organizations, whether it's a bank, a university, a corporation, a government, the tiny few at the top know the big picture. And the further you come down from the capstone, the more people there are as the organization widens in terms of personnel. But the further you come down, the less and less those people know of what they're contributing to. They only know their contribution every day. They don't know, again, context, how those contributions fit together to show a very distinct picture, and a very sinister one. And so this is how this spider directs human society, with the vast majority of people, even in politics, having no clue whatsoever of what they're part of and what they are contributing to. And if you look at these terrorist attacks, for instance, the people that carry them out, and they're not always the people that we're told carry them out. They only know the next level above them in terms of orchestrating those attacks. But it goes on beyond those that they know above them. It goes on eventually into security agencies, and on and on and on up that pyramid of hierarchy, and eventually you're in the spider again. And there was a reporter in France called Saeed Ramzi, who infiltrated one of these terrorist groups in Europe. And he came out and talked about what he found. Obviously, his face shielded, so that he's, obviously it's not called Saeed Ramzi. That was the name they used. And what he said was extraordinary. He called these militants, he called them fast food jihadists. He said one of the main things that I saw is there was no Islam at all in them. They would talk about Islam. They didn't want to improve the world or anything. They were just, in his words, lost, frustrated, suicidal, easily manipulated youths who had been promised a palace, a winged horse of gold and rubies if they carried these attacks out. So we're dealing with it. My book before Phantom Self, the present one, was called The Perception Deception, because that's what we're dealing with. It's all a perception deception, because when there's a few of you and you want to control the many, you cannot control them physically all over the world. You have to program their perception of reality, their perception of self, their perception of world events, so that they see them in a way that suits your agenda for global transformation. And it's a perception deception at every level, including these fast food jihadists who are being perceptually deceived also by that which they do not even know exists.
You made reference to your new book, The Phantom Self, and I've heard that in regards to this book, you say that it includes one of the most important chapters you have ever written. Why is that particular chapter that you're talking about the most important?
It's certainly the most important at this moment. I call it transphantomism, the chapter. And obviously transphantomism refers both to phantom self and to transhumanism. It's a long story. I mean, when I'm doing these events, I talk for 10 hours in 4 sections with about 1,600 illustrations. Not because I like the sound of my own voice, but because there's so many dots to connect before the apparently crazy makes total logical sense. The reason I call the book Phantom Self is what I call Phantom Self is a self-identity with our name, our race, our religion, our income bracket, our sex, our whatever, whatever label people or labels that people give themselves. What I'm saying is that's not who we are. That's what we're experiencing. What we are is awareness, a simple state of being aware. And all the form that we identify, quote, life with, are just vehicles for that awareness to experience what is, in fact, a ludicrously narrow band of frequency that the human body and the conscious mind can perceive, in actual fact, decode. And what has happened systematically is that humanity has been isolated in terms of its focus of attention in the five senses. So instead of having a wide, expanded perception of attention, which can not only acknowledge the world that we are, quote, physically, although we're not even doing that, but let's say physically living in, but is also aware of awareness, insight, intuitive knowing beyond the world of the five senses. This is the worst nightmare of this cabal, this perception deception, because they want people's attention focused purely on five sense reality and to self-identify with being five sense reality, phantom self. I'll give you an example of the power of focus. I don't know if it's still on the internet, probably is, but many years ago now, I saw a video which was basically people with a basketball, and the line came up over the video, words to the effect of count the number of times the basketball is thrown between so and so and so and so. And people focus on it, and they count the number of times, and then at the end, another line comes up on the video which says, "Did you see the gorilla?" And the vast majority don't. And then they play the video back, and now, of course, you're not focusing on the ball, you're looking at the video in a more expanded context. And in the middle of the ball being thrown around, someone in a gorilla costume walks into the center of the shot, looks around, and walks off. But because of the focus of attention, they don't, on the ball, the vast majority don't see it. This is the power of attention. So the idea of isolating people in the five senses, what I call disconnecting the droplet from the ocean, is to isolate attention and therefore self-identity. And once you lose an influence with your more expanded awareness, which gives you intuitive knowing and insight beyond thought, then where are you going to look in that focused five sense state to get a fix on who you are, what's happening in the world, or about anything else? You're going to look at the world of the five senses. You're going to look into the media. You're going to look into the education system, as we bravely call it. You're going to look at what people say around you. You're going to look in the world of the five senses to understand the five senses. You never will. It's like looking into a movie screen, trying to understand where the movie's coming from, what the movie is. You're not going to do it. You've got to go and find where it's being projected from. So this has been very, very powerful in isolating people in the five senses in terms of their awareness, and thus turning them into a fraction of their infinite self.
I love what you said about disconnecting the droplet from the ocean, David, because isn't that what for centuries and centuries that's been done with religion? We were told we were nothing. We were born in sin, right? We have
Absolutely
to
right.
we have to go to a priest or someone else in order to even connect with the divine.
Yeah.
We've been lied to for we've been lied to since this we've been lied to forever about our
Yeah.
true nature, and our true nature is that we are divine individuals, part of the whole.
Yeah, and this has gone on for this period you're talking about because the same force that's manipulating the world now was manipulating it then, as I go into
Bingo.
in
Yes.
my books in detail. And you're absolutely right, because what does religion do? What does religion do? See, um, everything is an expression of everything else. And what happens in the hidden is reflected in the seen. So in the hidden, we are being focused, our attention is being focused on five sense reality and being disconnected from our more expanded awareness beyond this reality, beyond this matrix. And what are religions? They are isolating the perception of self in the congregation from the expanded self, what in religion they call God, by putting this strata in the middle called priests and imams and rabbis that are that isolate that if you like middleman and woman, that firewall in computer terms between that which we can connect to directly and that which perceives itself as what I call phantom self. Now, where I'm going with this is I know from my 26 years of walking this journey, I know from going around the world now that what I was told 26 years ago about what I called the truth vibrations, I know it's happening. I'm seeing dramatic changes in people, both in numbers and in the kind of people, system people, you might call them, who are suddenly looking at the world in a completely different way. They never thought they would. There's an awakening going on. And what this whole transhumanist agenda is, and this is why I call that chapter in Phantom Self transphantomism, it's to take this disconnection from five sense self-identity awareness to expanded awareness by connecting five sense the five sense mind technologically to a technological sub-reality, which I've been writing about for a long time. And they're talking openly about doing this now. People like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive. Google are massively involved in this. That's why they've renamed most of the company, or much of the company, Alphabet, because Google is such a buzzword that when you hear the word Google, it registers. But Alphabet, well, who the hell's Alphabet? Most people don't even know that's much of the old Google. And they've done that to hide the extent of their involvement in this transhumanist agenda. I expose it massively in these events and in the books. So people like Ray Kurzweil are saying that by 2030, humans will be technologically connected to what he calls the cloud. And that when we become connected, it will be a hybrid of biological and technological thinking, artificial intelligence thinking, and that gradually the artificial will take over from what we now call human, and eventually that will do all the thinking. Now, the reason they're being so open about it is because A, they have to sell it so that people will accept it, but also the way they're doing it is to say that this will make us godlike. This will make us superhuman. And another thing that they are saying to push people into this is that the speed of development of artificial intelligence, machines and robots, is heading so fast to the point where it will be more, quote, intelligent than humans, the human mind. And therefore, humans have to take on technological thinking to keep up with the robots. Well, I have a simple answer. Stop producing the robots that are more intelligent than humans. But that's not the game, because the idea is that the machines take over. I mean, you know, there is so much symbolism in the Matrix movie trilogy that was not much less than the truth. and often was actually right on the truth. So the idea is that we get technologically connected to this what Kurzweil calls the cloud, which is based on a global Wi-Fi field, and that will do our thinking, the thinking of the conscious mind. It will take over basically much of the human subconscious, and that it will fundamentally, technologically, disconnect humans completely from an influence of their expanded consciousness. Another point, which of course, if you're building this cloud, what I've been calling for years, the technological sub-reality, and it's based on Wi-Fi fields, which are all around us everywhere, then you have to get the Wi-Fi coverage of the planet to everywhere, no one excluded. And that's what they're doing.
Oh, David Icke, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I want our listeners to know that you can actually hear and see David live. He is on a worldwide wake-up tour with upcoming speaking engagements both in North America and Europe. David, just for the month of September, for what's remaining, you're going to be in New York.
Yeah, I'm in New York on Saturday at the Grand Prospect Hall, and in Brooklyn, just down the road from where I'm sitting now. And I talk from 10 in the morning till 10 at night in 4 sections with 1,600 illustrations. And it's sharp on 10 o'clock that I start. And it's funny, people say to me, how do you talk for 10 hours? I don't use a script or anything. And I honestly say, the biggest problem is getting all I want to say and all I want to get across over in 10 hours. That's the scale of information that's available and the dot connecting that's available now. The following Saturday, on the 17th, I'm going to be at the Irvine Marriott next to Los Angeles. Same again, all day, 10 till 10. And then the following Saturday, the 17th of September, I'm going to be at the Craneway Pavilion in San Francisco, near San Francisco. And details are at davidicke.com or at theworldwidewakeup.com.
And people can also get if you're not able to go see David live, and I highly recommend it, because you will walk in one person and you will leave a completely changed human being, very much awake, with probably a lot more questions. But also you can get his new book. It's called The Phantom Self and How to Find the Real One. That's available right now. Oh, David, I'm unfortunately we're out of time, but I want to invite you back anytime you wish to come on Out of the Box Radio. We would love to have you back on the program.
Oh, that's great, Christine. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today.
Oh, it's lovely. And there's so much more I want to talk to you about. Oh my goodness. Princess Diana, the royal family, Prince, all of this stuff that's been happening. Thank you so very much for your time today in this wonderful introduction to some of our listeners, and for some of our listeners who know of your work, to hear from you again. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
All right. Again, folks, that was David Icke, and you can see him live at the World Wake Up Tour that's happening right now. Also, you can get his latest book, The Phantom Self and How to Find the Real One. Just go to davidicke.com. That's it for this week's edition of Out of the Box Radio. As always, I want to remind you to think outside of the box. I'm Christine Blosdale. Bye for now.